sense means, is it 50 years old? And I'm not there yet. But this works with the city's historic preservation ordinance that allows local historic districts, and the idea that the city hopes that this will maintain a very strong character of the neighborhood. So the Cornwall Park neighborhoods are here along Broadway. There's a sense of wanting to maintain the front yards without what are technically called snout houses, the one where you drive right up over your front lawn to get to your garage, and having access only come through the alley and so on. The wonderful bungalows that don't have those garages stuck on the side. If we work with the city on zoning, for example, if that's been a long-term characteristic of the neighborhood, we can work to retain that characteristic with new buildings that come in too. So it's the idea is to use this. So one of the issues here is we take existing buildings, the old Baptist School of Industry, which later became Acres Taxidermy, and Acres Taxidermy has been in just about every historic building in town, as you'll see in a minute. But here's what it looked like, and some of these properties can be updated. That's now kind of studio space and some condos being renovated on the inside and make it a dramatic transformation, still maintaining a nice sense of the building and the neighborhood. Now, our students haven't done anything with this yet, but this gives you an idea of some of the things that can happen. So in this historic neighborhood surveys, we've got a series of partners, the city, the museum, the library, neighborhood association themselves, individual property owners. We've had a number of meetings about how to do and research your own property history, and if you're interested in that, the State Archives building here will be having another of those, and if it's not there, I think it'll be at the public library, where you can learn how do you research the history of your exact piece of property if you wish, and are there extant photos of it in previous times, and these types of things. So we're looking at these districts here. There's been an initial survey, kind of light level, of what properties looked like they were built at what time, beginning in the 1890s all the way up into about 1960, which gets us just to the very edge of the, quote, historic time, and you get a sense of the lettered streets and South Hill and York. This survey's already been done. What we're working with at Western is to involve students through historical research and internships, mostly working as slave laborers for me right now, but perhaps other things as we move along here. So this winter we had 6 history students and 4 anthropology students working with the city. Now that may not seem like a lot, but the students are doing great works, and perhaps if you want to ask them what they're doing and was there really any value in this, you can ask them after the talk tonight. We're looking like we're going to have between 8 and 10 students in history alone, continuing to work on this in the spring. We may continue some through the summer and fall and working with the neighborhoods on this project. So one of the things that the students did is I put them on these old fire insurance maps. The Sanborn Fire Insurance Company developed these wonderful large-scale books with beautiful colors pasted in and so on. And I had my students set to the exciting task of going for each of these through each of these neighborhoods for the books that are in existence from 1907 to 1963, keeping track of where each non-residential structure was and what was happening there. One of the things that will be very valuable for the neighborhoods is if they can go to the city and say, this structure actually used to be a commercial structure, not residential. And it may allow the city and the neighborhood then to keep an economic base in the neighborhood in ways that might not be possible if it's been converted to a dwelling space and it wasn't obviously one before. So beyond just thinking about my individual piece of property, then we're thinking about the whole neighborhood and shifts and changes. And I have to yet comb through what the students handed me and their journals where they're recording this. But I know that in looking at some of those structures, they learned what was a livery stable in 1907, became an auto repair place in the 1930s, may not have been in existence in the 1950s. But seeing those kinds of shifts and changes across time in the neighborhood that they're looking at, I'm hoping allows them to see those layers of shifts and changes that take place, just like what happened on the waterfront. So as they drive through a neighborhood now, do you see it differently? Mostly in terror, oh, Friday's going to give us some other weird assignment and let's get out of here. So then I asked them to go to those spots and take a picture of what's there now. So then they're producing a historical document. The record that they've pulled together, plus the photo of that place now. Is it the same? Is it commercial at all? Is there anything there? Is there a condo building there? What is there? Is the freeway there? Which was another problem. The thing that's killing the students right now is that they're going through the manuscript census records. Now, some of you interested in genealogy have looked for individuals, I'll assume, through these things. There's a great interest in genealogy right now. What my students are doing is compiling a database of all the people in that neighborhood, starting with the most recent available census in 1930 and going backward. Like, one of the things that I assumed is we probably know less about Bellingham in 1930 than we know about Bellingham in 1900. See, when I ask my students, think of something historical. Black and white photos, old maps, ancient things. But historical is also a relative term. And so I thought, we know this will get us there, and it's also the biggest and most difficult one too. But we're going to take these students through the multiple generations of students who come through this program and march them backward. What they're doing in creating this database is then we'll certainly make it available to any and all who want to use it in a public forum. But they're also allowing the people doing the consultant project for the historic nomination to say, the lettered streets demographically look like this in one time frame, and this in another, and this in another time frame. So that we can say, was it really a working neighborhood? Was it a neighborhood for workers in the waterfront? Or were there something else? Boarders, lodgers, you guys have seen a lot of boarders. It also raises the question, well, who's running the boarding house? Is it mostly women? Are they widowed? That certainly was a pattern up near the university. A lot of those tenement houses that are still tenement houses for students have been, at least since the 1920s, student flop houses run by, at that point in time, usually a widow who invested her pension money and bought into the place. So I think this gives a depth of understanding of the community that isn't there, and that one of the resources that even 6 students bring, logging 80 hours of work in the quarter, is substantially more than any one of you would log on your own to create this database and then to create this resource for the whole community. Now, that's horribly tedious work, and they complain to me regularly about it. A little more exciting thing that they've done for this project is to go through photograph collections. And the problem with many of the photograph collections in our town that are in public archives, like the museum or the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies, is they're not labeled 1905 J Street. They're labeled, Bill Wilson in front of his house, 1910. Who's Bill and why should we care? And so what I had the students try to do is to go through these collections in the Center for Pacific Northwest Studies collection And based on the descriptions that are there, plus their own eyeballing, to try to see if they can identify which photos at least go with which neighborhood, if at all possible. Now, if any of you have done any photographic research in town, and you've gone to the museum, you just talk to Jeff Jewell, and he has a memory of every single photo that's ever been taken anywhere, and tell you who's standing third row from the left, too. If Jeff gets run over by a bus, however, we're going to lose all of that. Jeff, sorry. He's not here. I'm just waving at the camera right now. And so the idea is, and Jeff has done a good job too, of trying to identify photos not just on their description on the back, but also then how can other people get access to them. So this is one of the things that the students did. So I'm hoping that my students, in looking at these photos, find the territorial courthouse in that shape, find the territorial courthouse in that shape, and there it is again, as a taxidermy building, and find the historical courthouse in that shape, and also in its current shape. If they can look at that building and see these layers of use across time, it seems to me that they will be coming away with a much more mature vision of place, a much more mature vision of what history is in and of itself. So beyond then being just helping hands, helping you folks out in your collective community efforts to find out more about your neighborhood, I'm asking the students to think about landscapes, not just a singular landscape, but landscapes. Now that simplistically we can say, oh, I look at Fairhaven Park and I think about Fairhaven Park at its formulation. Somewhat different, although not radically different. Whatcom Falls Park Bridge in its current formulation, or in a previous, earlier formulation, its first, when it was first built. I want them, though, to get beyond that just simple then and now, and to think about what happens to places as they themselves transform. Whether it's a structure like the old courthouse that after a fire had to be rebuilt. And think about buildings and landscapes in the context of disasters and accidents, plan changes. In fact, to see much of what's around them as really impermanent rather than permanent. That the change is what is guaranteed rather than the permanence. The waterfront itself has gone through many, many changes. There's no sense in stopping that, but seeing those changes and recognizing them as part of the era in which they happened. I want them to see layers of time and use. This is a view many of you have seen before, right? Looking down there from Maritime Heritage Park up at that. But if we step in time and perspective a little bit, what we see in that same general location is an Indian seasonal fishing village with the bustling city right up above it. It's a landscape that we tend not to think of in Bellingham because the Indians are over there across the bay. But I can guarantee that people on the reservation certainly have stories about where